Welcome, everyone. We'll start with a short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of meditation on something that we looked at last week. And first of all, sit in a position that is both comfortable but also conducive for meditation practice. That means mainly keeping your back straight if you can. But at the same time, be relaxed as much as possible. Let go of any tension that may be in your body. And let's start by generating a really positive motivation as our reason for being here and being part of this class. So if you're comfortable with bodhicitta, as we just expressed in the prayer of refuge and bodhicitta, having the wish to become fully awakened, fully enlightened, just like the Buddha, so that we can help all other living beings be free of suffering and reach enlightenment as well. So if that's something you're familiar with and comfortable with, you can bring that into your mind as your motivation. Otherwise, if you're not so familiar and comfortable with bodhicitta, try to at least have a sense of altruism, meaning caring about others, wanting to be helpful to others as much as you can, not harm others. And so you could think that your reason for being here is to learn ways in which you can be helpful to others and learn how to not harm them and make your life really meaningful and beneficial for others and for the world. So if you're comfortable with that, you could make that your motivation. Otherwise, bring up whatever motivation is comfortable for you, something you can relate to. Okay, then once you have settled your motivation, spend a few minutes being aware of your breathing coming in and going out. Bring your mind back to the breath anytime it wanders away. So don't be surprised if you do get distracted from the breath, if other thoughts come up or you hear sounds that distract you. That's normal. Just notice when that happens and gently disengage from that other object and return your awareness to your breathing. So just try to stay aware of the breath coming in and going out as much as you can, and return to that whenever the mind wanders away. So last week we started looking at the 5 hindrances to meditation, the first of which is sense desire, having desire for objects of our senses. So bring to mind an object that you find attractive and can get attached to, but better to think of something that for which you have just a mild level of attachment or desire rather than something really strong. Your mind just kind of goes crazy with desire for. So it could be something like a bowl of your favorite ice cream, or a hot, relaxing shower, or your favorite music. So just think of some such object and just bring that to mind. And once you've thought of the object, put aside the object and try just to be aware of the state of mind you have of wanting, desiring, longing. See if you can recognize the way that this desire is expressed. Is it strong? Is it steady? Or does it come and go, pulsing or flowing? And where in the body do you experience this desire? What are its bodily expressions? And what are the feeling tones of this desire? Do you notice any other mental conditions? For example, judgments, reactions, associations. And if you do notice any of those mental states, what are the feeling tones of those? Okay, so you may not have had enough time to really explore an experience of sense desire, but got something on my nose. You could try this on your own when you do have time and that feeling of desire is coming up. You could try exploring it. So it's useful to do that. It's useful to get more familiar with this experience of desire, because it's definitely something that arises in our mind, and it can arise during meditation. And it's probably the main reason that our mind gets distracted from our object of meditation. Most of the time, when our mind leaves the object of meditation and wanders off somewhere else, it's usually related to desire. So it's good to get to know it and explore it. And this meditation is from a little e-booklet, which is called Working with the Five Hindrances. The author is a Canadian monk by the name of Achan Tiradamo. He's been a monk in the Thai tradition, the Thai forest tradition, since 1973. And it's quite a nice book with a lot of useful advice. So I can email it to you via Effie. I'll send it to Effie and she can send it to you. And in this booklet, with regard to sense desire, he talks about the Buddha's view about sensual pleasures, so pleasures that we have with our five senses, while acknowledging that they do give the gratification of happiness and well-being. The Buddha gave many teachings explaining the limitations and dangers of following these desires. And the main reason for this is that whatever one frequently ponders on or thinks over, that becomes the inclination of the mind. Thus, thinking much about sensual pleasures eventually habituates the mind to thinking that way consistently. So if we keep thinking about, attractive and enjoyable objects of the senses, then that becomes a habit in our mind, and it's hard to stop. And the other day we finished our 3-month winter retreat, and we sat in a circle and everyone just shared something about their experiences during their retreat. And one of the young monastics talked about how she was trying to develop calm abiding, concentration, and really enjoyed that practice. But she also noticed that there were two things that kept coming up in her mind and distracting her mind and making it difficult to concentrate. One was her old boyfriends, and the other was movies. So I really appreciated her honesty for acknowledging that. But I mean, yeah, it is good to look at, what is actually going on in our mind much of the time. And that way we can get a sense of what our main objects of attachment and desire are. And then, yeah, if your mind has that habit, then when you try to meditate, it's very, very difficult, because the mind just wants to keep going back to that particular object. So this is one of the disadvantages. And then the Buddha also says it's impossible to engage in sensual pleasures without having sensual enjoyment, perceptions of sensual pleasure, and thoughts of sensual pleasure. In other words, sensual pleasure tends to overwhelm the mind. Our mind just gets totally overwhelmed with thoughts and feelings, perceptions, and so on of pleasure. And when the Buddha himself was practicing before his attainment of enlightenment, trying to reach enlightenment, he reflected that thoughts of sensual desire thoughts of sensual pleasure led to his own and others' affliction, and they obstruct wisdom, they're associated with distress, and they're not conducive to nirvana. On the other hand, renunciation, meaning, detachment, non-attachment to sense pleasures, has the opposite results. Doesn't lead to affliction. It enables wisdom and is conducive for the attainment of nirvana. And also in this booklet, the author says that sensual pleasures in themselves are not hindrances. It is the desire or lust for them that becomes a hindrance. So the problem isn't, the objects that we get attached to, boyfriends and movies and music and food and so on. The problem isn't the objects. The problem is our attitude towards them. If we have desire, lust, craving, keep thinking about them, can't get them off our mind, that's the problem. That's the hindrance. And then the way to become free of this problem of sensual desire is to see these objects as they really are. See their real nature, like impermanent, they are impermanent, and they're unsatisfactory. Those two are related because objects are impermanent, they don't last, they can't give us lasting happiness and well-being. So they're just not capable of satisfying us. And also selfless, that they're empty of in our tradition we would say empty of inherent existence. That's more difficult to understand. But if we can at least start to see them as impermanent, that's already a big help. So also in the Satipatthana Sutra, where the Buddha talks about these 5 hindrances and how we need to be mindful of them, the Buddha also talks about understanding how they arise. So it's also useful to understand, why do they come up in my mind in the first place? I just want to sit and meditate and focus on my breathing and have concentration. So why do all these other things come up in my mind? So in the Lamrim, there's an explanation of the different causes and conditions for desire and anger and so on, the different disturbing emotions, how they arise. So the main cause are imprints on our mind, which were left from previous experiences. In the past we had desire, we had anger, and those mental states, they come and they go, but they leave imprints on our mind for the same kind of experience to come up again, like habit, like a habitual tendency. And so in fact Buddhism says we're born with this, we're born this way, we're born already with the imprints of desire, the imprints of anger, and so on. Nobody had to teach us. It's not that we learned them from our parents or other people. They were already there in our mind from the time we were born, because we had them from in past lives. So we come into this life already with imprints of these disturbing emotions. And then another condition for these to arise is the objects. When we encounter attractive objects, things that appear pleasant, we usually develop attachment for them. When we encounter unattractive, ugly, or frightening objects, then that triggers our aversion and our anger, our hatred, and so on. So we have the imprints in our mind, and then when we encounter objects, which could be people or other beings or anything, any kind of object, that object is like a trigger for those afflictions, those disturbing emotions to come up. Another factor is paying attention, what we pay attention to. So if you watch your mind, then you'll probably notice that when you do, for example, you see an attractive person or some other kind of attractive object, then even afterwards, the mind keeps thinking about that again and again and again. It keeps coming back up in your mind. And the more we do that, the more we pay attention to and think about and even get obsessed with that object, then that also increases the affliction, the desire. Same thing with anger. When you are angry at somebody, that person, you keep remembering again and again that person and what they did and what they said. See, it's almost like your mind gets obsessed. Have you ever noticed that? Anyone notice that? the mind getting obsessed with certain people, certain objects. And so that's another factor that causes these disturbing emotions to come up. And then another one is influence of other people, and also the media, the things we pay attention to, like movies and books and internet and news and what people say. We're very much influenced by other people and also by society. And so, yeah, for example, if you watch a lot of violent movies or programs or computer games or something, you probably find that brings up more of that state of mind in yourself, more kind of violent, aggressive, angry thoughts. If you pay attention, if you watch, romantic movies and, listen to romantic songs, then that will probably stir up more desire and attachment. And so this is why they say it's really important, if you're trying to practice the Dharma, to have, make connection with teachers, spiritual teachers and spiritual friends who are trying to follow this path, who are trying to work on their emotions, and rather than just let them go wild, because they can have a helpful effect on us. Yeah, being with them will help us to have less desire, less anger, and so on. So these are just some of the factors that, affect the arising of disturbing emotions or hindrances in our mind. So we can work with at least some of these, and, by working with them, reducing them, we can reduce the frequency of these disturbing emotions coming up. And I find it helpful to think about how there are causes and conditions for these emotions to come up, for desire, for anger, and so many, many causes and conditions. And we don't always have control. In fact, most of the time we don't have control over the causes and conditions. They just come at us. And then we find ourselves just feeling these disturbing thoughts and emotions. I find that helpful to then avoid beating myself up, blaming myself, thinking, oh, I'm such a bad person because I have anger, or I'm such a bad person because I have desire. I know other people have that problem too. So if you understand, well, these things come up in our mind because of causes and conditions, and we don't have control. We can start to get more control through the practice of meditation and other kinds of practices. But right now, we're almost like helplessly under the control of the causes and conditions. And so, yeah, they're just going to come up without choice. Okay, so let's continue. If you could put the slides up, Effie. Okay, so we're looking at this list of 5 hindrances. This is in connection with the 4th type of close placement of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of phenomena. And in the Pali tradition, that kind of mindfulness is practiced by looking at different groups of phenomena, different types of phenomena, starting with these 5 hindrances. So these are 5 hindrances to single-pointed meditation. If they come up in our mind, then it's very difficult for us to have good concentration, which is a very important thing to develop in Buddhism. So we need to look out for them and know how to manage them when they come up. So we've already looked at the first one, which is sensual desire. The second is called malice, or also called ill will. And this is associated with anger and hatred. And so this particular hindrance, for example, if you're meditating, you're trying to meditate, and maybe yesterday or sometime in the past you had an argument with somebody, or somebody did something to you that was really hurtful, really disturbing, then the memory of that comes up in your mind, and your mind just gets all caught up in feeling angry at this person, and you might even go to the extent of having making plans for how to get back at them, how to take revenge on them. Has that ever happened to anybody? Okay, so that's one way that this can arise and disturb our meditation. Another way is that we might just feel aversion to something. So, for example, a sound. This is a problem that I have. I like peace and quiet, and so when I'm meditating, you get super sensitive when you're meditating, and so if there's some unpleasant sound happening, then it's very hard to avoid being distracted by that. And I can also get kind of annoyed and wish that person or that being will stop making that noise. Like, for example, here where we are, there's a lot of wild turkeys just roaming around, and now it's springtime, and they start making a lot of noise. The males are gobbling, gobble, 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 and competing with each other, who can be the top turkey. And the females are also making noise. And so sometimes they're right outside my window making this noise, and it's not pleasant. So yeah, I have to work on that, because in the past I would sometimes get quite annoyed. But yeah, so this is the second hindrance of malice. Malice is quite a strong word. But it could simply be annoyance or irritation or aversion. And it can arise towards anything, another person, another being, or to yourself, or to some sensation in your body. You might have a feeling of pain or discomfort or itch, and your mind can react with aversion towards that. And so the antidotes, well, it said that the best antidote is loving kindness. That's like the total opposite of anger and hatred. But that can be difficult to just suddenly generate if you're already full of anger. So, before doing that, it can be helpful to contemplate the faults of anger, just to recognize, how anger leads to problems. Today in the Abbey, there was a class where they were talking about anger, and everyone was asked to take a piece of paper and write down what they experience when they're angry, what they experience physically, physical feelings, and then emotionally how they feel, and then how it affects their relationships with others, and then how it affects their spiritual practice. And then they kind of compared, and somebody put all of those answers on the board. So there were these long lists of these unpleasant results of anger. And that's a really good exercise to do. You can do that on your own. Just look at your own experience of anger and what are the results of it? What are the consequences of it on your body, on your mind, on your relationships, and so on. And ideally, we will recognize that it has, brings a lot of problems, leads to a lot of problems. And also it can lead to creating bad karma. When people are angry, they sometimes act in ways that are negative and create bad karma, and that just brings more suffering in the future. So it's good to really look at that, contemplate that, and hopefully you come to the conclusion that you don't want to feed anger, and instead you want to overcome it. There's lots of antidotes to anger. I don't have time to go into them all here, but there's even whole books about this. For example, one book called Working with Anger by Thupten Chodron, published by Snow Lion. Another book by the Dalai Lama called Healing Anger, where he was teaching Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the 6th chapter, which is all about how to have more patience and how to overcome anger. So there's, if you do need more antidotes for anger, then those are some resources. Third is lethargy and sleepiness. And I think sleepiness is pretty clear. That's when we're, nodding off and going to sleep during meditation. And lethargy, it can be experienced physically as well as mentally. Physically, we just feel kind of a lack of energy, a lack of stamina, kind of heavy. And then mentally, mental lethargy is also like a heaviness. The mind is dull, unclear, lacking energy. So this is something I think many people experience right after eating a big meal, especially on a hot day. So those conditions, it's almost impossible to meditate with those conditions because you just feel heavy and sleepy and you can't even stay awake. So if either or both of those are happening, then the antidotes are to energize yourself, try to do something to get your energy going. Like if you're sitting in meditation, it's good to open your eyes more, sit up straight, don't let your body slouch. Tibetans say it's good to meditate on light. Visualize yourself filled up with light and the area around you filled up with light, so that image of light can help to energize yourself. You could also contemplate uplifting topics like the precious human life, something that will, get your mental energy going. Oh, I'm so fortunate I have this precious human life. I really want to make good use of it. Qualities of the Buddha and so on. So those are things you can do while you're sitting on your meditation seat. But if you still feel heavy and sleepy, then you can take a break, stand up, go walk around a little while. You can splash some cold water on your face or get some fresh air. If you can, look out over a vast space, vast distance. So, take a few minutes to do those things, and that could help to overcome the sleepiness, and then you go back and try again, and hopefully you won't have that problem. Okay, then number 4, restlessness and regret. So these are counted as one because they both have a similar effect on us. They cause us to feel uneasy. Restlessness, it could be physical, like it's just hard to sit still. You can't sit still. It could also be mental. Your mind can't stay still. It's just just very agitated, full of lots of thoughts. So restlessness can be physical or mental. And then regret, this is mental, and it can mean, you know, you remember something you did that you feel bad about. And in a way, that's a good thing. It's good to realize mistakes that we made or harmful actions that we did, so we can purify them and, you know, resolve not to do them again. But it can become a hindrance in meditation if we keep thinking over and over and over again, oh, I did that thing. Oh, you know, it's just like a mind getting obsessed with it. So that's not helpful. So if you do remember something negative that you've done, then best to purify, put your energy into purification, and then leave that aside, because we can't change the past. So the antidotes, focus on breathing. So focusing on breathing is to calm us down. That's a good calming strategy to calm down restlessness. And then remember that the past is over. That's a good antidote to regret, because we can't go back and change the past. So to continue thinking about and worrying about and feel bad about the past isn't productive. What is productive is to think, okay, I made a mistake, and now I realize that, you know, that wasn't a good thing to do, and I will really try my best from now on to not repeat that mistake. Now, so face forward, going forward, this is how I'm going to do things. And then purification. So if you do, you know, if it really was something you did that was wrong, non-virtuous, then do purification. Then doubt, deluded doubt. So there's different kinds of doubt, and some doubt is actually helpful. Like when we listen to teachings or read teachings of Buddha, we're supposed to question. We're not supposed to blindly believe. You know, Buddha said, no, don't just blindly believe what I'm saying, but think about it, check it out for yourself. So that can involve some doubt, like, is that true? Buddha said this, but is that really true? So it's helpful. That kind of doubt is helpful. But deluded doubt is where we think things like, oh, maybe there's no such thing as enlightenment. Maybe there's no such thing as karma. You know, yeah, people talk about these things, but there's no proof. Scientists haven't come up with any proof for them, so they're probably not true. And it can interfere with our practice of meditation, because then we think, well, what's the point of meditating? You know, just enjoy myself. Why do I have to sit here and try so hard to keep my mind focused? And, you know, it doesn't seem to be working. So deluded doubt is that kind of doubt that can interfere with our practice. It could also be like about meditation, you know, like, is this really worthwhile? Is this really a good thing to be doing? Yeah. And yeah. So doubt, that kind of doubt can make you kind of paralyzed. Yeah. Like you just don't have the energy, you don't have the impetus to go forward, to keep going in your practice. So that's why it's a hindrance. So antidotes to, first we have to notice it, recognize it, and impermanence. So understand that doubt is just like anything else in our mind. It's impermanent, comes and goes. It's not always there. So try to remember a time when you didn't feel this doubt, when you felt quite, you know, trusting and confident that this was a good thing to be doing. Meditation is good. The Buddha's teachings are good. So remember that, yeah, okay, there are times when I had that feeling. Now I have doubt, but it's impermanent. It's gonna, you know, not always be there. And then contemplate the Buddha's qualities and his teachings, try to recognize, you know, the good things he has achieved, the good things he teaches, and so on. That way you can restore your confidence, your trust in the Buddha, in his teachings, and in the practice of meditation. Study the Dharma. I find the more that I learn about the Dharma and the Buddha's teachings, the fewer doubts I have, the more confidence that I gain in these teachings and in this path. So study more, learn more. Finally, mindfulness of breathing. So just focus on your breathing. That can help to calm the mind and avoid following these thoughts of doubt. And it's helpful to know that, you know, it's okay to have doubts when following the path. It's not a bad thing. It's kind of normal. And so you don't have to be completely free from doubt right from the beginning. So this is just a very brief look at these 5 hindrances. And like I said, I'll send you this booklet that has a lot more information on them and how to deal with them, if you know, if this is something you'd like to do. So the next slide, so the Buddha gave some similes, analogies to these hindrances and how they affect our mind. And he used the example, like if you have a bowl of water and you're maybe you don't have a mirror and you're trying to see your face in the bowl of water just to, you know, check something about your face. That's the only thing you have at that point in time. And so if the water is clear and calm, then you would be able to see a reflection of yourself. But if it's not, then you won't be able to do that. And so using that analogy, the Buddha said that sensual desire is like water mixed with dye, you know, like color got into the water, making it red or yellow or green or whatever. So if you look into that water, you're not going to see things correctly. You're not going to see your face correctly. It'll be, colored. And so in a similar way, when there's desire in our mind, we don't see things correctly. We don't see the object in a correct way, but it appears in an exaggerated way. We tend to put a lot of projections and expectations and, you know, fantasies. We make the object into something much more than it really is. And so it causes our mind to, be like water mixed with dye. And the second, malice or aversion, this is like boiling water. So if the water is boiling, then it's very not peaceful, and you wouldn't be able to see a reflection in the water. So in a similar way, malice, aversion, anger, hatred make our mind boiling, you know, very agitated, very unpeaceful. So it's very hard to work with a mind like that. Third is lethargy and sleepiness. These are like water filled with algae. It's pretty yucky. So, not at all clean and clear. And then 4, restlessness and regret or worry. This is like water stirred by wind. So when the wind is blowing on the water, it makes it, you know, unclear and unpeaceful. It makes it agitated. And diluted doubt is like dark, muddy water. Okay, so water that's filled with mud. So it's not at all clean and clear, but dark. So that can help us to just recognize that these 5 hindrances don't have a good effect on our mind. And if what we're trying to do is develop concentration and develop positive qualities in our mind, these 5 things are counterproductive, not helpful. Okay, then next slide is, so we looked at some specific antidotes for the 5 hindrances, but there's also the Buddha taught these 5 general methods that we can use with all of them. I did talk about this in a previous week, but I didn't put it on a slide, so I thought it might be helpful to put it on a slide. So the first is pay attention to a virtuous object. So if one of the hindrances is in our mind, then that makes our mind kind of not positive, not constructive, not in a good state. So instead of letting the mind get stuck in that state, think of something virtuous. For example, Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha. So if you have a good feeling for the Buddha, you have confidence in the Buddha, thinking of the Buddha kind of brightens your mind, makes you feel more positive, more confident. Then you can think of the Buddha or think of a spiritual teacher who really inspires you, Dalai Lama, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So bring to mind someone or something that puts you in a good state of mind, positive, constructive state of mind, rather than this disturbed state of mind by the hindrance. And number 2 is examine the danger and disadvantages of that hindrance. So I talked about that already. It's good to recognize, what are the effects if this hindrance is in my mind? What does it do to my mind? How does it affect my mind? Is it good for me? Is it beneficial for me? And for my practice, my spiritual development? So do that kind of investigation. And hopefully you'll recognize that the hindrance isn't helpful, but is actually harmful and obstructive. But that's something we need to check for ourselves and come to the conclusion for ourselves. A third method is to just ignore it. For example, if you have some angry thoughts coming up in your mind, just ignore them. Don't let your mind entertain them, engage with them. So I was trying to do that this morning when I heard the turkeys gobbling outside my room. I just ignore them because they go away. They're not there all the time. They go off and look for some food. So I just thought, okay, it's temporary. Just ignore them and carry on with my practice. Number 4 is examine how it develops and how it's impermanent. So this is kind of paying attention to the hindrance and trying to understand it. Like, how does it arise? Where does it come from? What are its causes and conditions? The more you can understand it, the more you can work with it. You can manage it rather than be hijacked, taken over by it. And also it's impermanent, how the hindrance is not a permanent thing in your mind. It comes and goes. That's very helpful. I find that one really, really helpful, just to remind myself, it's okay. It's just, a thought. It's not going to stay permanently. It comes and goes. So then I don't get so upset about it, and I can just ignore it and go back to what I'm doing. And then the 5th one is overpower it. So this is like, if you've tried the above 4 and they don't work, that particular hindrance is still there in your mind, then the Buddha said, crush it, crush this non-virtuous mental state with a virtuous one. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I guess, you just really make a strong effort, concerted effort to focus your mind on something virtuous, positive, and constructive, and just say no, a firm no to this non-virtuous one. So if we work with these methods, these antidotes to the hindrances, and we train our mind in calm abiding, then over time we'll find that non-virtuous thoughts just naturally decrease. The mind becomes more quiet, more single-pointed and concentrated, and we become the master of our mind rather than being, under the control of disturbing thoughts. And this isn't like unhealthy psychological repression. It's not that we're repressing or suppressing these thoughts, but we're using wisdom, intelligence, and other, constructive states of mind to work with our mind and learn how to keep our mind in a positive state rather than taken over by disturbing ones. Okay, I had a little bit more to say about just some last comments about these 4 close placements of mindfulness. We don't have time to go through every single detail, as you can imagine. That could take a whole year or more. But hopefully, you've gotten some idea about these practices of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or 4 close placements of mindfulness. And yeah, just have one more slide about this, but I think I'll wait till we come back after the break. So let's have our break now for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and look at this one. Okay, so we've been spending quite a few weeks looking at these 4 close placements of mindfulness, which are really important practices in all traditions of Buddhism. So whether we want to attain nirvana, freedom from suffering, or we want to attain full enlightenment, Buddhahood, to help all other beings, we need to practice these, cultivate these. This practice helps us to free our minds from mistaken ways of seeing things, like seeing things as permanent when in fact they're impermanent, seeing things as wonderful and perfect and satisfying when in fact they're not, and so on. And then in the Mahayana tradition, as explained in the commentary by Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen, his commentary to the Ornament for Clear Realization, he says that another reason to meditate on these is to abandon these 4 types of grasping. These are like 4 conceptual errors that we ordinary beings have, and they're all related to a sense of a real I, a self, a me, which you probably know is, our basic problem. We don't see ourselves correctly, but we have an incorrect, inaccurate perception of our own self, I, thinking there's a real, inherently, independently existing I somewhere inside of us. And so that's our basic problem. All other afflictions and problems come from that. And so there are these 4 kind of erroneous conceptions. First is bodies as the basis or the abode of this type of self. So we have this regard to ourself. We have the feeling that this body, this physical body, is like the abode, the home of this incorrect self, this sense of a real self existing from its own side. It seems to live inside this body. So this body is the home, the basis of that type of self. And that type of self, in fact, doesn't really exist. It's wrong. It's like a hallucination. And yet we think there is such a self, and this is where I live. I live inside this body. And then the second is with regard to feelings. We have this conception that feelings are what this self enjoys and experiences. So again, based on this sense of a real, objectively existing self, which in fact doesn't exist, when feelings arise, particularly pleasant feelings, okay, we enjoy our pleasant feelings. Maybe some people enjoy unpleasant feelings. I don't know. I've heard people say that. There's some certain amount of enjoyment with unpleasant feelings. Maybe it just makes them feel alive. Like I'm really here. I really do exist because I'm suffering. I don't know. But anyway, so feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings are things that are enjoyed or experienced by this real, inherently existing self. And they can make us feel more real. You know, we have these feelings. I must exist because I have these feelings. I feel this way. You know, so they can sort of further concretize this mistaken sense of self. And then the third is mind. Okay, so we have this conception, mind is the thing which is the self. Okay, so we tend to think that that's what our self is. It's our mind. I think probably most people recognize I'm not my body. My body is just this mass of flesh and bones and blood. That's not me. Who I am is my mind. I am my mind. So my mind is me. Okay, so we tend to think that, you know, our mind is that self, that real, objectively existing self. In the book, Following the Buddha's Footsteps, it says, we adhere to the false belief that the mind is an independent self. All the tenet systems below Prasangika Madhyamaka identify the mind or the continuity of mind or one type of mind as the ultimate illustration of the self. So the other non-Prasangika tenet systems will point to some aspect of the mind as being the illustration of the self. They think they can find the self within the mind. But the Prasangikas, on the other hand, say that the mere I, which means the person that is merely designated in dependence on the aggregates, is the illustration of the person. So when you try to say, well, what is the self that does exist, the conventionally existent self, the Prasangikas say it's not something you can point to anywhere in the body, the mind. None of those things is the self. The self, the person that does exist, is just what is labeled or designated or imputed in dependence on the body and the mind. Yeah, but anyway, if we think that our mind is a real, independently existing, objectively existing self, then that is a mistaken view, one that keeps us in samsara. And then phenomena, the fourth one, phenomena as what afflicts the self. For example, in the case of delusions like attachment, anger, and so on. So those afflict us, they make us suffer. But also phenomena are what purify the self, the positive aspects of the mind, positive mental factors like faith, love, compassion, and so on. Those purify and enable us to develop ourselves on the path. So this is not wrong. It's not wrong to think that there are certain mental factors that afflict us and other mental factors that purify us and help us develop. That's correct. But if that kind of notion is based on the sense there's a real I, a real me, a real self who gets afflicted by attachment and gets purified by faith, that's the mistake. Okay? That's the problem that we need to overcome. And so, so in each of these four kind of mistaken conceptions, the problem is the way we view the self, thinking that there is a solid, real, objectively existent self. We see ourself as standing alone, independent from everything else, and then view all other things like our body, our feelings, our mind, and phenomena as arranged around that self. There's this real self in the middle of everything, and then, it's my body and my feelings and my mind and phenomena and so on. And so when we practice the close placement of mindfulness, we're looking carefully at these different phenomena, like our body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, and coming to understand how they really do exist as impermanent and also as empty of that kind of self. There is no such thing as that seemingly real, independently existent self or I. So that's something interesting, another explanation for why it's important to do these practices, to clear up our misconceptions about these different types of things, objects, as well as our basic misconception about ourselves. And just one last thing, the Dalai Lama in his book found Following the Buddha's Footsteps, at the end of the explanation of these four close placements of mindfulness, he talks about the benefits of this practice. He says, in short, seeing the body as impure, we investigate its origins and see that it came from karma created by afflictions. Afflictions arose due to afflictive feelings. Tracing the origin of feelings leads us to investigate the nature of mind. And through this, we see that the mind is neutral and its nature is pure. Having the wish for happiness, we seek a method to free the mind from the afflictions which arise from feelings, which in turn keep us bound to this impure body. Investigating the method to attain happiness, we discern what to cultivate and what to abandon on the path. Through mindfulness and probing wisdom, we see that although the body, feelings, mind, and mental factors are the basis of designation of the person, they are not the person. So none of these four objects is something we can point to and say, that is I, me, myself, the person. There is no independent person that is findable by analysis, seeking the person's ultimate mode of existence. The I is empty of inherent existence. Continuous meditation on this cuts the ignorance that is the root of samsara. And then if we do these practices with the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, then that's how these practices become Mahayana, the cause of enlightenment. Okay, so any questions so far on anything I've said so far? We're going to leave this topic of the four close placements of mindfulness, move on to something else. it's a huge topic, a lot of material, but
Min has his hand raised.
yep, go ahead. Yeah, Min, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So, one of the things that sometimes I heard about a lot in this discussion about the afflicted emotion, like anger, for example, and and how to deal with them. I think one of the big questions that people have always asked is that I think in many ways our conventional like samsara wisdom kind of indicate that in some senses some of these afflicted emotion are useful. Like anger is useful because when you're angry, you want to go out and do something. You get angry at the government, you go out, you protest, and then eventually something changes. For example, uh, yeah, let's say that you want to build a company, right, or become successful in your career. You need to have like a strong desires for it. Even if you want to become enlightened in some sense, there's also you have to have a strong sense of desires for it. So I guess my question is, how do we sort of reconcile these two perspectives in the conventional wisdom as well in the Buddhist wisdoms?
Well, with regard to anger, I think in Western psychology, contemporary notions of things, yeah, anger is seen as an emotion that arises when there's injustice, when there's some kind of injustice happening. Somebody's harming others or somebody's behaving wrongly, and we get angry about that. And there's this notion that it gives us energy to act, to move, to bring changes. Yeah. And there's some truth to that. There's a lot of energy in anger. And and it can certainly move people to act and clear up injustice and right wrongs and so on. Um, However, anger itself, the way that it affects our mind, it makes our mind very disturbed. And this is something to check for yourself. When we're angry, we can't think clearly. We can't use intelligence and make intelligent decisions. We just want to, do something. And sometimes the things that we do are destructive and make things worse rather than better. So I think a solution to that is if anger comes up because of injustice, because of some wrong, it's good to recognize the anger and then say, okay, if I let myself get caught up in this anger and act out the anger, I might just make things worse rather than better. So calm yourself down, do something to calm yourself down, do some breathing meditation, and try to get your mind restored to a state where you can think clearly and rationally. What would be the best thing to do in this situation? How can I deal with this situation, clear up this problem in an effective way without just being violent and aggressive and so on? So that's a much better thing to do. You bring wisdom, bring wisdom into your mind and try to calm down your anger, because anger often just wants to do something kind of destructive. And yeah, does that help? Yeah. So that's one thing about anger. And then about desire, yeah, there's different kinds of desire. I was just reading about that in this book that I mentioned about the 5 hindrances. And he said desire itself isn't wrong because they use the same word desire for enlightenment. Yeah, they do have that term, desire for enlightenment or desire for nirvana. So in the sense of just being a wish, is not a negative thing. It depends on what you wish for. But it depends on what it is we desire. Okay. and how we desire. So if we desire alcohol, for example, we want to drink a lot of alcohol, or we want to eat a lot of food, or we make a lot of money, that kind of desire, we need to look at and check, is that really useful? Is that really something that's going to help me get further on the spiritual path, and so on and so forth. So Buddha mainly talked about desire for sense objects, like delicious food and pleasant feelings in the body and beautiful music, and of course having money and having people talk about us and praise us and so on. So there's a lot of desires that aren't helpful for our spiritual practice and are in fact counterproductive. So if we have a desire for those kinds of things and we're running after those kinds of things, then we're kind of going in the opposite direction to enlightenment and to nirvana. So you need to look at, what are the things you have desire for? Are they helpful and constructive for your spiritual goals, or do they just keep you longer in samsara? That's a good question. Okay, so let's carry on. The next slide is looking again at the 37 harmonies, just to remind ourselves of what we're doing. We're going through chapter 4 of the Ornament, and there's lots of material, lots of different topics in chapter 4, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche wanted students to learn about the 37 harmonies, which are explained in chapter 4. And so we're mainly focusing on those. So these are called 37 harmonies with enlightenment. They're all practices that help us attain full enlightenment Buddhahood, or in the case of like hearers and solitary realizers who want to attain nirvana. So they also do these practices for their attainment of nirvana. And so this again is the 37 harmonies broken into 7 groups. The first group are called the 4 close placements of mindfulness. So that's the one we've been spending a lot of time on, because that's where we need to start. When we're just beginners, we're trying to develop ourselves along the spiritual path. We need to start with those, work on those. And and then the second, and that's the description of that, is the path that thoroughly investigates things. So the practice of the 4 close placements of mindfulness, when you're doing that practice, you are investigating things like the body, the feelings, the mind, phenomena, to understand how they really exist and clear up misconceptions about them. Okay, then the second group is called 4 correct abandonings. And so I'm going to go through these remaining groups just kind of briefly, so you get some idea of them. We'll start with the second group, 4 correct abandonings. And then we'll look at the third is 4 legs of magical emanation. Very interesting name. And then 5 powers, 5 strengths, 7 branches of enlightenment, and 8 branches of Arya paths. So we'll just take a look at these, starting with number 2. So the next slide. So these are called either correct abandonings, and that's a translation of the Tibetan term. But the Sanskrit and the Pali terms for these 4 have more the meaning of a supreme striving. And I think that term is actually more accurate, because these 4 things all involve joyous effort and making some effort, some striving for something. And whereas the term abandoning is accurate for only one of the four. So it doesn't really seem to be such a correct term. So I'm going to be referring to them as supreme striving. Okay, so what it is, a supreme striving is an exalted knower of one who has entered the path. So that means someone who has attained at least the path of accumulation, the first of the 5 paths. So it's only in the mind of that person that we would find this supreme striving. It is a joyous effort that takes delight in practicing what is to be practiced and discarding what is to be discarded. And so in the Buddha's teachings, they often talk about, there's certain things we need to practice, we need to do, we need to cultivate, like faith and ethics and patience. Those are things we want to cultivate, practice, develop. And then there's other things we want to discard or get rid of, like anger and non-virtuous actions like killing and so forth. So, in the Buddha's teachings, this is basically what he taught, what you need to practice and what you need to get rid of or discard if you want to attain freedom from suffering and enlightenment. And so, so when someone learns about what's to be practiced and what's to be discarded and really wants to work on those, then that's the meaning of this. It's a joyous effort that wants to do those things. Okay, and there are four of these. The first one is preventing the arisal of non-virtues that have not arisen. So, for example, anger. Okay, we've been talking about anger. And so if you really investigate anger and what kind of effects anger has on you and your mind and your body, your relationships, and you also look out at the world, what kind of effect does anger have on the world, and you come to the conclusion that it's harmful. It's something very harmful, very destructive. It just leads to a lot of suffering, and it's also a big obstacle to enlightenment. If I want to become enlightened, there's no such thing as an angry Buddha. Buddhas aren't angry. So to become enlightened, we need to, be free of anger. And so if you come to that decision, that conclusion, then you would practice, really trying not to let anger come up in your mind. You try to avoid the causes and conditions that would bring up anger in your mind. Like just being very careful about your mind, watching your mind, and also maybe not watching violent movies because that might trigger anger in your mind, and not going to places or doing things that could trigger anger in your mind. So you just take a lot of precautions to prevent the arisal of that particular non-virtue in your mind. And then number 2 is abandoning non-virtues that have already arisen. Okay, so even if you're not successful and anger pops up in your mind, you see something, you hear something, and it stirs up your anger, triggers your anger, then you would, work on that and apply antidotes, apply countermeasures to not let your mind continue being angry. You would overcome that anger in your mind. That's an example of number 2. And then number 3, generating virtues not arisen. Okay, so with virtues, this has to do with the positive, constructive states of mind. So let's say, for example, faith. Faith is one of the virtuous mental factors. It's a very, very positive thing to have in our mind. And so you learned about faith, and you've learned about the positive results of having faith, but you recognize that you don't have as much faith as you would like to have, and so you want to work on that. You want to work on generating more faith. For example, in the Buddha and his teachings, the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so you would apply yourself to generate that particular virtuous state of mind by, for example, meditating on the qualities of the Buddha, learning more about the teachings of the Buddha. So those are some things you could do to generate that particular virtuous state of mind. And then number 4 is maintaining and increasing virtues already arisen. So if you could recognize that within your mind you do already have some virtuous mental states like faith, love, compassion, and so on, then you value those states of mind, and you want to make sure that they remain part of your mind, part of your experience. You don't want to lose them, and you want to work on increasing them, like generating more loving kindness, more compassion for more people, more beings, including gobbling turkeys. And I mean, that's not too difficult, but people who make war on others, people who commit horrific acts of violence on others, that's really difficult to have love and compassion for them. But you would think, yeah, I need to do that. I need to develop love and compassion for everybody. So you would work on that. And so those are the 4 supreme strivings. And as an example of the last 2, there's this one prayer. It's a dedication prayer that we often recite. You might be familiar with it. One translation is, "May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more." So I think that prayer is an example of the 3rd and 4th of these supreme strivings. Whatever bodhicitta hasn't yet arisen, may it arise in the mind of myself and all other beings. May we all generate bodhicitta. And whatever bodhicitta has already arisen, may it not diminish but increase more and more. Okay, so we can, even though we're not, we may not yet be on any of the paths, I know I'm not, but we can still learn about these and work on them. We do have to recognize the difference between the things that we want to develop, like love, compassion, bodhicitta, faith, the positive qualities, and work on developing those. And we also need to recognize the things that need to be overcome or eliminated, and work on avoiding those, not letting them happen, not letting them arise, as well as abandoning those that have already arisen. So this is something that a practitioner would start to work on from the beginning of their path, and then, or beginning of their practice, and then when they reach one of the paths, like the path of accumulation, they have the real thing, the real supreme striving. Joyous effort, being delighted, being happy to do these things. Okay, so let's go on and look at the next group of 37 harmonies. And these are called 4 legs of magical emanation. That's one translation. Another translation is 4 bases of spiritual power. So the term, both in Tibetan and Sanskrit, can have the meaning of leg or foot. In Tibetan, it's kampa. So kampa means leg or foot. And but it can also have the meaning of a base, you know, something that serves as the base or the foundation for something else. So that's probably a more accurate translation, a base rather than leg. Leg sounds a little funny. Okay, so what are these? There are 4 of these. These are meditative stabilizations or concentrations, that mental factor. Okay, it's one of the, if you're familiar with the mental factors, there's a group of 5 mental factors which are called object ascertaining mental factors. They include wisdom, but also concentration. So concentration is what are the mental factors. So that's what these are. These are the mental factor of concentration. In the mind of someone on a path, again, someone who's reached at least the path of accumulation, and they are supported on the 8 antidotes to the 5 faults. So if you've received teachings on calm abiding, shamatha, in the practice for developing calm abiding, they talk about 5 faults, which are not the same as the 5 hindrances we just went through. That's another list. But yeah, 5 faults that we have to overcome to develop shamatha. And there are 8 antidotes to those 5 faults. I'll go through those a little later, but so someone who has been practicing developing shamatha, calm abiding, and has developed those 8 antidotes and overcome the 5 faults, then that practice supports these 4 bases. And the second bullet point says, these are bases for attaining spiritual powers such as emanating one's body, flying, walking on water, passing through walls or mountains, becoming invisible, and so on. So just last month, we celebrated what are called the Days of Miracles, the first 15 days of the Lunar New Year, Tibetan New Year, commemorate a time in the Buddha's life when he made these miraculous displays of, you know, these amazing, beautiful things, and, you know, just created by his mind. And this was done at the request of a king, one of his disciples who was a king. And this king was concerned that some people, some of his subjects, were attracted to other religious teachers who were teaching them mistaken views. And he wanted them to, you know, follow the Buddha. And he thought that by the Buddha showing these miraculous displays, people would be more willing to follow him, which did happen. So not only did the Buddha make these amazing displays, but he also gave teachings. He gave them really beautiful teachings, and the people were just, yeah, many of them attained high realizations, many of them generated bodhicitta, many of them aspired to practice virtue. So anyway, the Buddha had these powers, these abilities, and he displayed them. And in Buddhist scriptures, there are explanations of how to develop these abilities, these powers. and these are some examples of them, like being able to emanate your body, have create kind of different manifestations of your own body, or different bodies. You could appear in other forms as well, like animals, birds, and so on. Also flying through space, walking on water. So don't think Jesus was the only one who could walk on water. So in these ancient texts from India, not only Buddhism, but I think also other Indian religious traditions, they have these explanations of how to develop these abilities, these powers, walking through walls or mountains and so on, making yourself invisible. And so to be able to have these abilities, these powers, you have to first develop really, really good concentration. So you have to develop calm abiding. You have to do the practice of calm abiding, achieve calm abiding, and then on the basis of calm abiding, you can go on to develop these abilities. So it's not easy. It's hard work. And also, the whole purpose of developing these powers is to benefit others. It's not to put on magic shows, impress people, make money, and so on like that. Definitely not. But as the last bullet point says, these powers are used to enhance one's practice and to benefit others. So they should only be used for some kind of beneficial purpose. And if you want to call these 4 legs of magical emanation, one explanation of that is just as our legs take us to other places, these 4 types of concentration enable us to emanate bodies that can go to other Buddha lands and hear teachings from Buddhas and make offerings to Buddhas. So that's one sense in which leg can make sense. Okay, so next slide. Let's look at these 4. So the 4 are the leg of magical emanation of aspiration. So again, these 4 legs are mainly the mental factor of concentration, the ability to keep the mind focused one-pointedly on an object of your choice. But there could be other mental factors as well that are accompanying them. You can have a number of mental factors at the same time. It's not that you can only have one at a time, but you can have a group of mental factors. Okay, so for the first one, the mental factor of aspiration is also included. And so this one includes qualities associated with concentration that are attained through aspiration and rigorous application. So rigorous application means that so when you're trying to cultivate virtuous qualities, okay, like faith or concentration or loving kindness or whatever, so there's different ways you can apply yourself. One way you can apply yourself is a rigorous way, like putting in a lot of very strong effort, but not necessarily in a continuous way. Like sometimes, for example, sometimes we go into retreat. We decide I'm going to do a retreat, and it might last a few days or maybe a few weeks or a few months. But during that time of retreat, we practice really, really hard. We really apply ourselves to our practice. But then we come out of retreat and our practice kind of goes slack. We don't practice so hard afterwards. So that's an example of rigorous application. It's kind of on and off, you know. We practice hard for a while, but not necessarily in a continuous way. And then the second one is effort, meaning joyous effort. And so this refers to qualities that are associated with concentration and attained through constant application. So constant application is another way that you might apply yourself to developing some positive quality, like concentration or like bodhicitta or whatever. Constant means you do it regularly, every day, without fail. But it may not be very rigorous. It may not be very intense. It might be a little, you know, just kind of, you know, a little bit of energy, a little bit of effort, but not so intense. And so it's said that the best way to apply ourselves, to apply our energy and our practice is both rigorous and constant, meaning, you know, we practice strongly and we do it in a continuous way, in a regular way. And in that way, we'll be able to really develop virtuous qualities and realizations and so on and so forth. Third is intention. So this includes qualities associated with concentration that are attained through familiarization and previous practice of concentration. So what this refers to is, yeah, you may know people like this or hear about people like this. They have kind of qualities, abilities, like clairvoyance. They can read people's minds, or they can see the future. They kind of know about things that are going to happen before they happen. Yeah, some people have these abilities, yeah, naturally. They didn't do any practice in this lifetime in order to attain them. Maybe even from the time they were children, they had these abilities, or they just suddenly start at a certain time in their life. And so the Buddhist explanation is this is due to previous practice of meditation, concentration, and developing these abilities. So they developed them before in another lifetime, and then they show up in this lifetime. Yeah, due to previous familiarization. And the fourth one is analysis. So this includes qualities associated with concentration attained through others sharing their discriminating, oops, I misspelled that, discriminating analysis. So this, for example, if you're a practitioner and you have a teacher who teaches you a certain practice, you know, they give you instructions on calm abiding, for example, how to develop calm abiding. And so this is something acquired from others, and then on the basis of that, you practice it yourself and attain good qualities. So whatever good qualities you attain through practice that you learn from others is included in this fourth one. So I think I'll stop there, and I was going to go through the 5 faults and 8 antidotes just to remind you of that, but I'll save that for next week. I think we've done enough tonight. And there's a little bit of time left if somebody has a question. This group is always so quiet.
Sometimes they email though.
Yes, yeah. I do get a few questions by email. Yeah, because sometimes the material is so, can be kind of overwhelming. Oh, Jessica, you have your hand up.
Mute myself. Last week we were talking a little bit about AI and what kind of influence it might have on a person's mind. And that sent me on a deep dive of trying to understand clearly what Buddhism would refer to as the mind. I looked up some different definitions. I found one by Rick Hansen, a neurobiologist, but was also influenced by Buddhism, and Dan Siegel is another person, and then also Damayaso, who is another neuroscientist, trying to really come up with a definition of what the mind is and how AI would influence it or not influence it. And I don't know if that was something I should put in an email or my findings on it or my own discovery, or because I figured those are things that I just needed to understand on my own to feel more grounded in these discussions that may not be interesting for other people.
No, I mean, the mind is very, very important in Buddhism. And in fact, there are books, whole books just about the mind. And I mean, this course is part of a whole program called the Basic Program. And one of the other courses in the Basic Program is called Mind and Awareness. I don't know if you've done that one. Yeah, yeah, that one is very, very helpful. You could probably find, online, an online. It's not easy though. It's not an easy topic. But yeah, but I was thinking more about your question last week, and yeah, according to Buddhism, um, consciousness is not something that can be produced or created by, for example, a bunch of people thinking in the same way, having the same idea. That is not going to create a new consciousness. I mean, it might affect their own consciousness. Like if you have 10 people who are studying something together or using AI together and they all get the same ideas, so that will affect each of their own individual consciousnesses, but it would not produce a new consciousness. According to Buddhism, that's not possible. So each person, every single person, has their own individual consciousness, and it's something that's not physical, totally, non-material, non-physical, and it's that quality of knowing or experiencing or being aware. So it's that part of us that has those experiences, like seeing and hearing, thinking, feeling. Okay, so that part of us that has conscious experiences, that's our consciousness. And it's changing all the time. It's always changing every moment. It's not a fixed thing that's always the same, but it's more like a stream, a flow made up of different experiences. So consciousness is something each individual person has. And as far as I know, there's like a finite number of consciousnesses. There are no new consciousness coming into existence. But for all the sentient beings, all the beings that exist, each being has their own consciousness, like the kitty cat behind you. You're cute. He or she has a consciousness, and their consciousness is having different experiences. Cat consciousness, cat experiences. But yeah, each sentient being has their own consciousness, which is again always changing. That's just like very, very brief, but like I say, it's a really huge subject. And yeah, maybe I'll look into some things I could send you that might help you have a better understanding of that.
I'd like to do the FPMT one that you just mentioned, but definitely with a teacher, not just something online that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I have lots of questions that come up.
Hmm.
I would want to be able to explore those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for your question, and I think it's time to end and do our dedication prayers.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyekabuddhas, victorious Lozang father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the virtuous one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you. And yeah, thank you, especially Venerable Sangye Khadro. We appreciate your teaching so much, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.